This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, an international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I am Maxine Bell, a coach, writer and artist, and your host for the latest AC podcast series, Let's Make Coaching Creative. In this series, I'm having inspirational conversations with innovative, passionate coaches who use various creative tools with their clients. They will share their journeys, insights and expertise currently so relevant in a changing, uncertain world. We hope this series opens your eyes to new ways of coaching that allow both us and our clients to bring together all that we are. My guest today is Lorlett Hudson, a transitional coach and founder and CEO of One Hand Can't Clap. She is also a multi-award winning inventor and creator of the critically acclaimed Things Mama Used to Say, which is a 52 card box set of Jamaican and Caribbean proverbs. And because they sounded a bit different to many of the cards that are out there, I wanted to know more. So welcome, Lorlett.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Maxine, for having me. Really appreciate being here. Yeah, to share my story with you.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed our informal chat we had before this, so it would be great to share it with our listeners. When and how did you become a coach, and what do you love about it?
Well, I always say to people, I think I've always been a coach because, people come to me, they talk to me. I mean, I could be at the bus stop, I could be in the supermarket, and somebody will automatically come to me and have a conversation with me. And sometimes even me surprise myself because the things that they share with me is quite personal, I would think, and they feel very comfortable. I mean, I was in the post office and a young man came up to me, was telling me that he lost his mum and, just start having a conversation with me. So there's something about me that says, you're a coach, I can talk to you. And that's it. I would say that I've always been a coach. But as time goes along, I realized that I had to get myself certified and get the proper qualification to enable me to do what I do and not having any concerns. Because the first thing that people ask you, what makes you qualified to do this? Because they're looking at it from the perspective of qualifications, but I look at it from the perspective of energy, purpose, and really want to do it and motivated by it.
Yeah, you did say to me before that you were a natural born coach, and I think even in our chat you started sort of coaching me a little bit, which I thought was because it's just in you, isn't it? It's you think you described it's in the fibre of your being or something similar.
Yeah, it's that thing around being able to listen, and when you're reliable listening to what people are dealing with, it enables you to listen from that perspective. So you might have said something to me and the automatic coach go in and, so what's that like, in that sense. It's that inquiry, isn't it?
Yeah, and that deep listening as well, which makes you very perceptive, that you pick up on those pieces in the conversation that then lead you to ask a question that then takes the coachee, which was temporarily me in that moment, somewhere else. So I'm also interested, your company is called One Hand Can't Clap, and it'd be great if you could explain to listeners what your company is about, but also why you chose that name.
That's an interesting question. Thank you for that, Maxine, because, it's really important. I grew up in a very tight-knit community, and from a very young age, you learn the discipline of working in a team, looking out for each other, being inclusive as well, so that for me is what One Hand Can't Clap's about, is recognizing that no individual can actually do anything by themselves. You need support. And coming from a community background, you look to the elderly for their wisdom. You look to your family for support. And, there is always that results that you get through people. And for me, One Hand Can't Clap, it was the necessary conversations to have. And people say that all the time. What does One Hand Can't Clap means? It's about partnership. It's about teamwork. It's about being inclusive. It's really making sure that the resources that you have around you, that you value it. Because I think sometimes we tend to diminish the people around us or not recognizing that they have something to contribute. And if we take that mindset into everything that we do, that everybody matters, I think it's important and it's a great discipline to practice.
Yeah, and you focus on African Caribbean leaders and entrepreneurs. Can you tell us why that's so important and what the impact has been?
Again, it comes down to representation matters. And for me, it's around seeing people that look like me to enable me to do the things that I really want to do. And sometimes when you look around and you don't see anyone who's doing anything like you want to be aspired to, it can be quite daunting because it's like, well, if I don't see anyone that looks like me, what makes me believe I can actually do it? And these are the questions that my clients will come to me sometimes and said, yeah, well, I wanted to be a coach, but I don't see anyone that looks like me as a coach. And so I just took it on when I first started working with young black boys in schools to enable them to see what's possible. And the conversation of the time is that, African Caribbean black boys are underachieving. So I started to run leadership breakfast clubs with them in school to enable them to understand what leadership is about, that it's about influencing their environment. And the question I'd ask them is, if you could change the world, what would you do? And I don't think many people ask them those questions, more like, you've been a nuisance or something in that sense, because they had problems with schools in, understanding. And this is what I said. Sometimes we have to recognize that the education system is not necessarily geared to everyone in the aspects. And so people learn differently, people think differently, people operate differently. And so for me, I see it, why I focus on African Caribbean leaders is really developing their talents and enable them to recognize there's a bigger world out there than the environment or what society tells them that they can be, and change that, basically using my experience to enable them to see what's possible.
Yeah, that's really important work. I mean, I've worked with young people from lots of different backgrounds, and there's so many perceptions. There's boxes they feel they sit in, there's limited views, and there's lots of stereotypes, aren't there? There's stereotypes about young black men and young black women that, need to be broken down. But I like your approach that you're going straight in to work with those young men and get them to believe that they're more than maybe what they've experienced or been told in some often very subtle ways, even a history class that's not covering all the history that should be covered, for instance. It's not helping them connect to their identity in some way.
That is so true. And, I think it's important sometimes to connect with somebody who have got the lived experience to enable you to understand the struggle and the resilience and understand history. Because, sometimes if you look at all you hear about is history which has nothing to do with you. And you question, so where do I belong? And then it's that thing around belonging. And so I worked with young people for 6 years, and then I was getting the mature returners, the ones from between 35 to 60, coming to me and having the conversations, because they are the very same young people who then become adults who never got the socialization to understand the power of their identity and have a sense of belonging. Many of them work in corporate and they believe that they can't be themselves. And so that work then shifted from working with young people to mature adults to enable them to really look at their skills and their talents and what's possible for them and enable them to think differently.
Yeah, you're so important. I mean, it's no different than somebody who's maybe had a drug addiction that goes to someone who's had a drug addiction that's recovered from it. Somebody who's a role model and can show that change is possible.
And Viola Davis, she's having conversation recently because I think she's written a book about finding me. And she told a story about how she was brought up in poverty and how, where she is now. And it's such an interesting story because, she said representation matters, because not until she actually saw Cicely Tyson on screen in Sounder that she really see, oh yeah, acting is for me. And it's by actually seeing Cicely Tyson that it really resonated with her.
Yeah, it's great, and I any listeners that resonate with any of this, if they go to your website, there's some really nice sort of stories on there, or recommendations of experiences with you that have had a really positive effect. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I'm just wondering how from that you came to create your cards.
Oh, that's a great, interesting question again. I love your questioning, Maxine. You're amazing. And yes, while I was working with the young boys, I wanted to create a tool that enabled them to look at their culture, their history, and understanding the power of words. Because I think words is important. Sometimes we said, oh, well, just brush it off, it doesn't matter. But it does matter, because how people interpret what's being said, that's the key. How you interpret it. It's not necessarily what you said. It's what the young people, or anyone you're speaking to for that matter, actually hear what you said and they interpret it in the context of that. And so I wanted to create a tool, a leadership tool, which enable them to be critical thinkers and being able to deconstruct what's being said, and teach them to understand that sometimes what you hear is not necessarily so in that sense. And what the Proverbs does do, it enables you to change your perception. And metaphorically, it's metaphorically teaching people to understand something which might not seem obvious. So, for example, you can't sit in a bucket and draw water at the same time. So the focus now would become bucket. There's always a focus, something that focuses you. So if you really look at the Proverbs, there are the resources that people use way back throughout history, the resources that was available to them. So, whether it's a bucket, a tree, a dog, or leaves, or river, or whatever that was available, that's what they used to communicate. So you really get connected to your environment and what it is actually being said. So it's all about being metaphorical. And so what enables the young people to really think about, when I say bucket, then there is a visual way of being that you start to look. So if it's a table, you then visualize what a table would look like in that sense. So, like in coaching, sometimes they said what you focus on is what you get in that sense. So if I was to say to you, look around the room, look at green, you probably would see something else, because, it's not, when you start focusing on something, you see it. And I think there's a theory around, a friend of yours might have gone out and buy a green Persia car, and you've never noticed it before until you start to think, oh, yes. And then you start seeing green Persia car everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's the same as the Proverbs. What you focus on, it enables you to focus on something. And then the wisdom and the philosophy of the richness of what's being communicated. And if you practice that, so the other proverb is, when beggar beg from beggar, he'll never get rich. And what that is actually saying, it's not necessarily the saying, there's something wrong with the beggar. It's actually saying, when you deconstruct it, it's really who you surround yourself with is more important, than not really recognizing who you are in your relationship, who is in your community, and enable you to understand who you surround yourself with. So with the young people, I used to say, if you surround yourself with young people who are not aspirational, who is not passionate about education, if there's 9 of them like that, then you're going to be number 10. So you need to be mindful of who you surround yourself with, if that answers the question.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you use the cards and the proverbs in them to get to a deeper meaning, to pick up different perceptions we have about it and about ourselves from it. And I remember I came up with one that I know well, and what most of us know well, that one about children should be seen and not heard. And that's not in your cards, but that's just an example of one in my upbringing that actually had quite a big impact on me. Breaking that down, is that true? What does that mean? All those questions come into my mind, and I think you used that with me, didn't you? So it's that kind of thing of maybe how some of those sayings as well affect our beliefs about ourselves.
That's true. Because, that same proverb, this is what I was saying to you around the commonality. You're from a different background to me, and a different race as well. But, we all been taught that, children should be, heard and not seen. So you start to imagine that. So imagine that being told to a child, and then that child interpret it. What they then do is play down their talents, play down their skills, and not really have much to say or to contribute. Because somewhere, as a child, you were told, children should be seen or not heard. Then you just numb yourself and not really having a conversation. And a lot of people come to me with coaching for that same reason. We've been told, don't raise your head above the parapet, don't say too much. And so you see people go into meetings, really, really talented individual goes into meetings and have nothing to say because they haven't worked through that whole process of told, don't say too much because somebody else might judge you. And the other thing, as I said to you in our first conversation, there's always those three things that I listen for: blame, shame, and complain. We live in a society that we like to blame people, we like to shame them, and we like to complain about them, and not really understanding that there's more to what's going on than we think we know. Sometimes it's how people were socialized. It's how people think and how they interpret it, situation around them.
Yeah, and I think what I got from you with our first meeting was there was this sense of, I think, compassion from you and understanding, probably for the years of work you've been doing when you're in situations, because you called me out on something straight away, because I came in with the perception that your cards, I think, were just for African Caribbean people, and that was very wrong. And I remember you called me out on it in the first few minutes. But in that first few minutes of conversation where you did that with me, we then created a connection from it, didn't we? It was a really interesting process. It was a good example of sort of how some of the work that you do, really, that you were very direct, you're very clear on it, you're non-judgmental, and I've probably felt that. And it just created connection. So I just wondered if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the first thing you said to me was that, I remember, is that you've been on my website.
Yes.
And you've been on my LinkedIn page, and what you got, the perception is that, the cards were for African Caribbean people and community. And rightfully so, because that's where you're coming from. And unless somebody points something out to you, you don't know. And you don't know what you don't know, because that's the reality of life. We don't know. So we go with what we know and not going beyond. And that's what my coaching is around. You have to go beyond. Learn what you never knew and go beyond what you know. So you go into a place, what I call empty, without anything. So that's in no judgments. And so when you said to me, my perception is that these cards are for African Caribbean people, the first thing I said to you was, where does it say that? Where does it say that? Where does it tell you that? And where is it written? There is nowhere it's written that way. It's your perception. And just imagine that we see someone for the first time and, we have no idea. And I'll give you an example of how that could be perceived. Jamaica itself is made out of so many different nationality. And, I was on a bus and there was this lady, she was a white lady, and she was speaking in Jamaican patois, and I was like, my goodness, this is interesting. And then I went up to her and I said, I'm really fascinated. I mean, it wasn't like an accent that you kind of put it on. It was natural. She sounded like me in that sense. And then she said, oh, I'm a Jamaican. I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? But until she opened her mouth and speak, I would never have known. So this is what I'm saying. It's around breaking down perception, the assumptions that we have. Sometimes we diminish things as well because we don't take the time to find out more about the situation and people. We just make assumptions because this is what we know. So my work really is go beyond what you know. So you might know this, but is it true?
Yeah, and I think the way you dealt with that with me was I didn't feel blamed or shamed or any of those things. And that means that I felt you're also very honest, which I really like anyway. That's something I like. But I felt very open to talking about it, if you know what I mean, because there wasn't any shame or blame. That you knew that somewhere there was a story behind my perception. And I know that story is very important as well in your work, isn't it?
Very much so. We all have a story. It's either you're the victim or the hero. We all have a story about something. Oh, poor me, this is what happened to me, or I'm the hero in that sense. And story, it's where you capture your lived experience. Because to me, storytelling has been in my family ever since I could remember, and I suppose before their time. And this is how people pass on their stories, because community. You pass the story on through the community and you hand that down. And you realize that grandmother did it this way, and then that passed on to the next generation, the next generation. And so, we have to be mindful of stories, and that's where assumptions comes into it. And that's where we diminish people, true stories. Because somebody might have said, you know, that woman is this way, or this person is gay or that way, or this woman is this way, or whatever it is. They're passed down by story. Boys should wear blue and girls should wear pink. It's a story.
Yes, yeah, it is. And coaching really often is breaking down some of those stories that are having a negative impact, aren't they? Those, like you just said, girls wear pink, boys wear blue. If you believe that, it's great to go into a coaching environment and break that down, because I don't even know where that's come from, to be honest. But it's quite a well-established thing, isn't it?
That's right.
A lot of those belief systems.
And it's the same as women shouldn't do certain things, and women shouldn't be this way, and it shouldn't be this way, and women can't be leaders, because the reason why sometimes those story comes down is that we see leadership as being hierarchical in that sense. And so if you've been told, children should be seen or not heard, then how are you going to step into a leadership role? Somebody's got to come and deconstruct that. Somebody's got to come and disrupt that mindset and that thinking to enable a woman who's been told all her life that she should not be seen. Stay silent. How do you then break that down to enable her to navigate herself and to become the woman who she's supposed to be according to her purpose? So this is why, for me, coaching is so important, because it's really about having a conversation with somebody saying, have you considered this? And for me, that's the beginning. Have you considered this? Have you think about that? So it's looking at things in alternative ways and not just one way.
And let's going back to your cards a bit as well. They are in Jamaican patois. Can anyone use them? I know, because I think you've said before that you go into certain boardrooms and there is a lot of misunderstanding about these cards.
Yeah, it comes down again to the perception. What you see, what you know, what you believe. If you don't know something, you just don't know it. And how I approach every aspect of my life is, somebody doesn't know something. Somebody said something to me, just like I did with you. It's my training, my way of being. You obviously don't know. And if you know it, you would have done it. And this is what I say to people all the time when they say to me, well, they should know better. You can't do better if you don't know better. You can only do what you know. So the first thing is, they're written in Jamaican pattern because they're my lived experience. If I was writing them in British standard English, are they used to be or not to be, in that sense. I just love the, the self-expression and the come on, Dre, when you use the Proverbs, there's something very flowery around you, how you do it, the self-expression. You enable people to, break out of some of the inhibitions as well, because, it's the way how you express it. That's why they created in Jamaican Proverbs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and of course that, like you said, it's your lived experience, it's your authentic expression. So if I, as a white woman coming and looking at your cards, I could easily say, well, I don't understand Jamaican patois. What would you say to me?
Okay, what don't you understand? This is a very, very good approach in terms of what you say, because, I remember going into a corporate situation with 20 white middle-class men, really and truly, and they all saying to themselves, their team wasn't functioning effectively. So they actually asked me to come and just do a conversation with them. And it's a conversation. Everything starts from a conversation. And so I put one hand card clap on the board and asked them, what does it mean? And everyone started to give their perception and their understanding of what one hand card clap means. And then, they came up with teamwork, partnership, corporations. And I said, where is that right now happening in your teams? 100%. Can you be honestly say that teamwork, partnership, cooperation is actually happening in your team? And, no, it wasn't. So just from that saying, one hand can't clap, enable them to go beyond what they know. Because at first the perception was, what is this woman going to be telling us? What is this black woman is going to be telling us? What does she know in that sense? I mean, it's a normal thing, isn't it? It's a human condition. You go by what you know. And so by the end of the session, they really got how quickly, we were able to connect and really understand and look at the solution to the problem just by using one hand can't clap. That was it. So what I would say to anyone, and again, that's a very powerful question, there is no instructions with the cards. So everyone has to use it according to their own creativity, their own innovative way of thinking, and understanding that, the interesting thing for me is that when you get somebody from a different background started to use it and breaking down the perception, many coaches have bought these cards, and they're not just black people that have to use them, because when you get beyond metaphors, you realize to yourself, I mean, like Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that's a metaphor. It got you thinking, what does that mean? In that sense, to be or not to be. It really got you thinking. So it's the same as, you cast it in a bucket and draw water at the same time. What does that mean in that sense? And the good thing is, this translation is on the back. So it enables you to understand, okay, so I don't understand the patois, but let me switch it over and have a look. So the interpretation is there. So anyone can use it.
Yeah, it just sounds really interesting. I mean, I would probably set myself the challenge of not trying to turn it around for a little while and trying to work it out, I expect. But one of the things that I got from what you've said about the card so far is that it also is creating that connection as well, and it is breaking down those barriers. So you went into that room of all those white businessmen with your cards, and immediately, like you said, the immediate thoughts about you, there might have been some judgment about you as what's this black woman going to be able to tell me today? But how does it feel by the end of a session with you when you've broken down those barriers?
For me, I'm about teaching. I'm about learning. I am about breakthroughs. For me, if I can make a difference to an individual to see the world differently and to really get connected to another human being and not make judgments or assumptions, I diminish people. I think it's a very powerful way to be, because it's like this never existed before and now we existed, and you planted a seed in somebody's mind to actually recognize there's a different way of thinking. There's a different way of approaching something. What if everybody in this world was to take that approach, that, yes, it might look like this, but it's not necessarily that. So it could be, for example, you have a member of staff who were performing effectively, and then all of a sudden something happens where this person is not showing up on time. They're not showing up how they should be or how they ought to be. As a leader, your job is to go beyond what's there and find out what actually happened. Because it could be there's something going on at home. It could be that this person is not feeling well. I think for me, the power of the cards is look beyond what you know and really find out what actually is going on and become present to what people are dealing with.
And it's so important, with the world as it is now as well, to do this kind of work, to have that kind of tool to open doors, to break down barriers. And it almost feels to me as if it's connecting us to our shared humanity.
Definitely. It recognizes empathy, that something is missing for someone. And you as an individual, you as a leader, you as a coach, your job is to look beyond what's there. And, the most powerful thing, I think, is when somebody communicates what's not being said. That to me is really powerful. It's not being said. And it's up to you, the individual or the coach or the leader, to be able to go beyond what's being said and deconstruct what's being said. Because sometimes when people come to you, what they tell you is not necessarily true. It's something else. Something else is going on. And people have a way sometimes of communicating in a very, not very clear, because they themselves are not clear. And if they're not clear, then they can't communicate it. And sometimes people don't have the words. They really don't have the words or the communication to actually communicate what's there. So, in Caribbean culture, there is a way sometimes when people are not clear about going on. So they would, instead of telling you, like for my mum, I would say to her, how you feeling? And instead of she really saying anything, she just said, and what that tells me, it says a lot. That says a lot, if that makes sense.
Mm.
You just done it.
I just did
it. Yeah, you went,
I think that's because there's a number of thoughts going on through my mind about what you just said. I was just thinking about two things. One, maybe the power of truth, and two was also the freedom in being able to express honestly. I know the two are tied together. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that. Do you feel that truth, being able to be truthful and being in an environment where you're not being blamed, shamed or complaining is part of the change that happens?
Sometimes people won't communicate. And I think one of the biggest one is when you ask somebody, what is it exactly that you want? That's a prime example, right? And there is something going on about, I don't know. I don't know. What do you want? I don't know. And I always love that because it gives me access to something. Okay, so what if you want to know? What would that be like? Oh, yeah, and then the conversation just opened. But most people, when you ask them, because there's something there about if I discuss this or if I'm open about it, it might not happen. And so if people have a lot of disappointments in their lives, they're not going to say to you, listen, I want to own a house, or I want to do this, or this is what, and who am I to have aspiration? Who am I to really imagine that I can have this? So the easiest thing to say, I don't know. Because most people, when you say to them, you don't know, you leave them. So you don't know. That's it. And you leave them in that space. Whereas when somebody says to me, I don't know, I get very excited because, it's giving me access to say, okay, so what if you want to know? What would that be like in that sense? So you get them to start thinking that, okay, this person really get me and understand where I'm coming from.
And that's just demonstrated the power of a good question too.
Yeah. My coach always say, it's in the questioning. It's in the questioning that you find the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I was also wondering with some of these topics that might come up, how do you create that sort of psychological safety in a team environment within a business, for instance? Because some of the reasons people might not speak up is because of the actual environment in the company, for instance.
One of the things I always love is not asking people, what do you think? I never ask anyone, what do you think? Because when people really tell you what they think, it could go somewhere which is not comfortable. My biggest thing is, what is your concerns? Again, it's the questions, isn't it? When you ask people about what is concerns, that really break down a lot of barriers, because the concern is your concerns and it's not anyone else's concerns. This is meaning me. This is how I feel about the situation. And if you're in a team, even 20 people, and you just ask, what's the concerns? Then you got people thinking, okay, what's my concerns around this? How do I feel about this? But if you ask somebody, what do you think? That's something completely different. Because that's where, again, you get the shame, the blame, and the complaint in that. But if you just said, what's your concern? There's no space to blame anyone. There's no space to shame anyone, and there's no space to complain about anything. Because it's your concerns, and you have to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, that's true. So the statement of what do you think can take you in a defensive attitude and take you into, thoughts, but take you away from what you're actually feeling. Whereas the other question, what is your concern, connects people a bit to what they're feeling rather than what it kind of maybe gets into a little bit of the vulnerability that's going on underneath the surface. No, I just want to ask really, is there anything else that you wanted to say in regards to using your cards as a tool?
Enabling to see that there is a different approach in everything that we do. It doesn't matter what it is, there's always another way. So this is the situation you might find yourself in. And it's around being resilient, and it's about access, and it's about opportunity. It's being able to see, yeah, I might find myself in this situation right now, but there's another way. There's always another way. And so it could be you dealing with something. It all started with a conversation. And so you don't have to sit there and deal with it on your own. It's pick the phone up and speak to someone. I know it's not always easy. Sometimes, it's better to stay in bed and put the duvet over your head with what you're dealing with. But always recognize there's an alternative. And this is what the card is actually saying. You might be going through this right now, but there is another way. You don't have to deal with it on your own. There is another way. And it's the philosophy of understanding around the wisdom that there is always another way. Unfortunately, the capacity might not be there. The capability might not be there. And this is what we need to do to develop people to understand there is another way.
And that's what your cards are doing, I guess, opening the door to thinking there's another way, to shifting a perception or a false belief. So, yeah, they do feel like door openers to me. For our listeners, I wondered how can they get hold of your cards or contact you if they wanted to find out some more?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm all over the social medias, because of these days, everybody, the first thing they do, they go looking at where are you? You got to be visible in that sense. So I've got a website as well, which is www.onehandcantclap.co.uk. That's onehandcantclap.co.uk, and all on the social media. Because I think you have to be visible these days as a coach. You got to be visible. Because the first thing people do when you meet them, they go, well, where is that person? So they go on LinkedIn or they go on your website. And if you're not visible, then people wonder, what's happened to you? Are you real?
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to ask you as well, you won an award, didn't you, for your cards? Would you like to tell the listeners about that?
Oh, my goodness. When I first started, I wanted to create the cards. That's why I believe there's always another way. So many people told me that they were too black, in quotes. When I send them to the publishing houses, they'll come back and says, they're too black, there's no market for it. Wow. And so I published them myself and distribute them and marketed them myself. And I sold over 21,000 copies of them. And for me, there's another way. It's find another way to do it. So it was interesting when somebody approached me and asked me to nominate myself for an awards. And I was thinking, an awards? What for? But anyway, there's another way. So I nominated myself and I won British Female Inventor for Innovative Capacity Building. Courvoisier, the brandy company, also gave me an awards. I won several awards basically for the work. And you've been covered in all the newspaper you can think of. But I really pushed it because I believe in it. And so I did a series of road shows, up and down the country here in the UK, and London, Birmingham, Bristol and Leeds. And of course, the BBC and all the newspaper really took it on board. So just by me believing there's another way, I got a lot of support in the context of that. So it's a brilliant question. And I would say anyone listening, if you have an idea and to turn it into a reality, there are many people who's going to tell you no, but just go ahead and do it, because you never know where the results or where the opportunity will come from.
Thank you for that. That's really inspiring. I'm taking that into my own heart too. But, this is the power of walking your talk as well.
Thank you.
You tell other people to find another way. You did exactly that, and the results were amazing, actually, incredible.
Thank you. And it's true because, I remember when I approached a school and I said I was going to do the breakfast club, and the teacher said to me, I don't know what you're going to be doing that we haven't already tried, and it's a challenge. And so, for me, what has kept me going for 22 years in business, there's always another way. So I tried this and it hasn't worked. let's try another way. Let's look at it differently in that sense. Because, you never know what you might discover when you go beyond what you know.
Sometimes as well, by the sounds of it, it's also about finding another voice. So you bring somebody fresh in with a fresh voice, a fresh perception. It can shift things. I've seen that in many, many examples where that it's the right person at the right time almost, that has the right approach.
And that is true because, one person don't have all the answers. I mean, I shared on LinkedIn this week around the cards, funny enough, it's understand the diversity of voices and recognize that what you know don't necessarily grow you. It's sometimes what other people say to you that enables you. And as a coach, our voices transform the quality of life of people because they might be struggling with something for years. And you come along as a coach and you just ask a question that got them thinking. I remember one of my coaches asked me a question which has stood the time with me when she asked me the question, are you a liability or are you an access? And I was like, wow, I'm not a liability, I'm an access. So that really shifted my thinking about, I can't do this, because, and I said, are you a liability or are you an access? This is why the power of questioning is so powerful.
But what you said about diversity of voices matters as well, because we've all got different gifts. We've all got different qualities in our personality that we can bring to the world when we're really, particularly when we start to really stand true as our real selves. And that needs to be appreciated as well. I think that, it's not one size fits all. We need that diversity to reach a diverse group of people.
And it's true. It's valuing other people's contribution. I think what then happens sometimes because of the way society is structured, you haven't been to the right school, you don't look the right way, ageism, you name it, everything. As I said, it's that perception. What my message is, there's another way, and what really understand that what don't grow you, because there's a big world out there. There's a lot of knowledge that you don't have access to because you've never been in that situation. And if you've never been in that situation, then how are you going to know? You can read all the books on the planet, yes, that's great. But sometimes all it takes is somebody to explain something to you in a way as a coach that enables you to believe, oh my goodness, I never think of that. That's one of the most exciting things for me when I coach somebody and they say, oh, I never think of that.
Absolutely. And I think as coaches, hopefully all of us, I certainly believe in the potential of us all. And I definitely don't want us to give up on young people particularly. But we have to have some look at that do we really believe in everyone that we're working with? Do we believe that everyone has the potential to change? We can create incredible things as human beings. And I think if we can start as coaches working with that self-belief in everyone, to make that change in their day-to-day life. It doesn't have to necessarily even be anything huge, but if we all start to be better and more real and more honest and more caring, then who knows what could happen.
That's a good point. It's true. It starts with really appreciating people and valuing them and understand that we all can learn from each other. We can learn from anything, really. Anything. Anybody, any situation, everybody's got something to teach us. And you're never too old to learn anything.
No, you're not. And like you said before, everyone has a story. Everyone has previous hurts, previous experiences that they're bringing forward that, yes, sometimes need breaking down and changing. But to appreciate that everyone has that story in them can prevent that judgment or that blaming, shaming thing that goes on. So powerful work, Lorlett.
And the great thing is for me is recognizing the world that we're in. Our stories are important, and I value the good stories, and I value the bad stories, and I value whatever story it is, because it's in that story that's going to make you really see where you're stopped and what you need to do forward, because we have that story that either empower us or disempower us.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Lorlett, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much. A really interesting conversation that I'm sure our listeners are going to benefit from.
I love the whole work of transformation. And, when you can share that story, what it feels like, you and I are sitting down, we're from different backgrounds, but the humanity and the commonality that we have as coaches, this is why we do what we do, because it's sharing stories with each other, sharing experiences that enable, if somebody is listening to this, that actually there is a different way. There's a different way. I can look at something completely different.
Yeah, that can happen at every moment of the day if you want to, if you choose to do it that way.
And when something is transformed, it's like, wow, I didn't look at it this way. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, you're very welcome. It's nice to end on a big smile as well, which is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I have been Maxine Bell. For 20 years, the AC's purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the Association for Coaching and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our website at associationforcoaching.com. You can keep up to date with our latest podcast episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.